The Maktoum Dynasty, Architects of Dubai. Forget what you know about the city itself. This story belongs to the architects behind the curtain, the Maktoum bloodline. We are talking about a family dynasty worth trillions that took a patch of absolute nothingness and engineered it into one of the planet's most critical power centers. On paper, Dubai was a mistake. It shouldn't exist. No fresh water, no farmable soil, zero natural perks, just scorching heat, endless sand, and bad odds. But where the rest of the world saw a dead end, the Maktoums saw a blank canvas. They realized early on that real wealth doesn't come from what you dig out of the ground. It comes from being the gatekeeper, controlling who gets in, who gets out, and how money moves. Back in the beginning, Dubai was just a scrappy outpost clinging to the edge of a narrow creek. Fishermen were barely scraping by. Traders just passed through on their way to better places. Inside the palace, things were even uglier. Power was a game of musical chairs played with daggers, rivalry, backstabbing, and exile. That chaos forged a specific kind of leadership, cold, hyper-disciplined, and obsessed with playing the long game. Stability wasn't a luxury. It was mandatory. What set the Maktoums apart was their refusal to put all their eggs in one basket. While everyone else relied on one income stream, they pivoted to trade. They tore down walls and opened the ports. They lowered taxes to lure in the outsiders that other cities turned away. This wealthy family didn't wait for luck to strike. They built a gravity well that forced global commerce to flow right through their living room. When markets crashed, they shifted gears. When the oil finally showed up late to the party, by the way, they didn't treat it like a lottery win. They used it as leverage. They poured that money into logistics, real estate, and finance, turning the city into a permanent engine of growth. Eventually, Dubai itself became their product. A living, breathing asset worth trillions. That is how you build an empire without relying on a lucky break. Dubai isn't a miracle. It is a masterclass in strategy, executed one generation at a time. Before we dive deeper, I want to know where you are tuning in from. If you are in North America, comment the number 1. Europe, drop a 2. Asia or the Middle East, hit 3. Anywhere else, put a 4 down below. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this saga. Blood, betrayal, and the origin story. Long before the skyscrapers and supercars, the Maktoum story started with bloodshed. In the harsh reality of the desert, power was brittle and loyalty had an expiration date. Friends became enemies overnight, and staying in charge wasn't about your title, it was about fear, trust, and knowing when to strike. For a wealthy family on the rise, hesitation was a death sentence. The tension within the ruling clans hit a boiling point fast. Whispers of treason tore through the camps, turning brothers into rivals. A ceremonial meeting, which was supposed to be a peace treaty, turned into a slaughter. In a single night, entire family branches were wiped off the map. The lesson was brutal but clear: kill or be killed. When the dust settled, the losing side had two options: bend the knee or vanish. A small faction chose option 3. They grabbed their people, walked away from their ancestral homes, and marched north across the dunes. This wasn't a retreat, it was a reset button. For this wealthy family, exile was just a chance to rebuild the game with their own rules. When they finally hit the coast, there was no treasure waiting for them. Just a muddy creek, some beat-up huts, and starvation-level poverty. But they saw something nobody else did. The creek was a natural harbor, the ocean was a highway. If they played it right, they could hijack the trade routes. From that second on, Dubai wasn't an accident, it was a calculated move. That trauma, the betrayal, the escape rewired the family's DNA. Leadership became absolute. Loyalty wasn't up for debate. Decisions were made instantly and enforced ruthlessly. These ground rules, forged in violence, became the operating system for a wealthy family that swore they would never lose control again. The glittering city would come later. First, the dynasty had to survive the desert. Engineering a city from zero, the new location was harsh. No oil wells, no crops, no fortress walls, but it had location. For the Maktoum bloodline, that was the only ace they needed. This wealthy family understood that you can manufacture an advantage just by forcing trade to squeeze through a choke point. The creek became the city's backbone. It was a safe haven from storms and a tax haven for merchants. Instead of bleeding traders dry with fees, the rulers cut the red tape and played the volume game. Goods moved faster here. Deals happened quicker. Word got out. If you were feeling squeezed by other ports, Dubai gave you room to breathe. The government kept things simple. Arguments were settled fast. The laws made sense. Outsiders weren't treated like threats. They were treated like customers. While neighboring cities fought over ancient traditions, this wealthy family obsessed over flow-keeping ships, people, and money moving. They weren't just selling a port, they were selling stability. But don't think it was safe. Every day was a gamble. One bad season could starve the population. One rival port could steal all the traffic. So, the rulers refused to specialize. Fishing, pearl diving, re-exporting, they did it all. Dependence was the enemy. Adaptability was the only way to stay alive. It wasn't about luxury yet. It was about momentum. Shops popped up along the water. Shacks turned into warehouses. The markets stayed lit up all night. The settlement started to matter not because it was rich, but because it was useful. And when you are useful, you get leverage. Leverage buys protection. This wealthy family wasn't interested in building monuments to their ego. They were building a machine. Every law and alliance had one goal: make the city essential to the global economy. Once you do that, survival isn't about luck anymore. It's about design. Dubai was still small, still vulnerable, but it was no longer a mistake. The art of the deal. As the town grew, a shadow appeared on the horizon. The British Empire was sweeping across the oceans, turning trade routes into war zones. Small ports got swallowed up if they picked the wrong fight. The Maktoum rulers saw the writing on the wall. For a wealthy family trying to survive, this wasn't the time for bravery, it was the time for politics. Instead of fighting a losing battle, they ran the numbers. Protection was worth more than pride. They aligned themselves with the naval superpower, securing the one thing money couldn't buy: peace. Ships could dock safely. Merchants could trade without looking over their shoulders. While other leaders lost everything trying to be heroes, this wealthy family used submission as a strategy. The contract was straightforward. The British handled the foreign threats and the pirates. The locals ran the city. It wasn't surrender. It was outsourcing their security. In return, the city got legitimacy and a VIP pass to global trade networks that older, prouder cities couldn't touch. Under that protective umbrella, business exploded. Traders from all over the map brought cash, goods, and networks. The settlement turned into a neutral zone where the only thing that mattered was the deal. Predictability became their brand. Investors didn't want drama. They wanted guarantees. The rulers delivered. What made this wealthy family different was their discipline. They knew the difference between a partner and a master. Every treaty was temporary. Every handshake was a transaction. The goal wasn't to serve an empire forever. It was to buy time to build their own strength until they didn't need the British anymore. By checking their ego at the door, the Maktoums turned a weak hand into a winning one. The city didn't survive because it was strong. It survived because it made itself useful to the big guys. That utility made them untouchable. Dubai wasn't just a hideout anymore. It was becoming a necessity, the boom and the bust. The first taste of real money came from the bottom of the sea. Pearls turned the dusty outpost into a booming gold rush town almost overnight. The creek was jammed with boats, credit was flowing like water. Fortunes were made and lost in a week. For a minute, it looked like they had finally cracked the code. The rulers let the good times roll, but they kept one eye open. Pearling brought cash, but not control. It relied on Mother Nature and buyers halfway across the world. Still, the hype was real. Markets were packed. Families took out massive loans. Even a disciplined, wealthy family can get dizzy when the money comes that easy. Then, the bottom fell out. On the other side of the world, the Japanese invented cultured pearls. Suddenly, the market was flooded with cheaper, perfect alternatives. Prices crashed, demand hit zero. Within months, the ships were empty, the merchants were drowning in debt, and warehouses were full of pearls nobody wanted. The fallout was brutal. Divers starved. The credit system snapped. Poverty came roaring back. The city learned a hard lesson. If you depend on one thing, you are fragile. For the ruling wealthy family, this wasn't just a recession, it was a warning shot. Any system built on a single pillar is just waiting to collapse. The pressure inside the city spiked. Merchants were screaming for a bailout. Rivals started whispering about incompetence. Authority was being tested, not by an army, but by economics. The response was cold and calculated. The family restored order, ate the losses, and started blueprinting a future where no single industry could ever hold them hostage again. Pearls gave them a start. The crash gave them a spine. The disaster hardened their policies and sharpened their instincts. From that day on, diversification wasn't just a buzzword, it was religion. The city would never again live or die by one paycheck. For this wealthy family, the crash wasn't the end. It was the moment they grew up. Rebellion, control, and survival. The economic crash didn't just clear out the marketplaces, it fractured the foundation of authority. As livelihoods evaporated, frustration turned inward. The merchant elite began questioning every decision. Advisors pushed for spending caps and stricter control. For the ruling family, the threat wasn't coming from outside the walls anymore. It was inside, and it was far more dangerous. A reform movement quietly took shape. Councils gathered in back rooms and behind closed doors. Proposals started circulating, demanding shared power and financial oversight. At first, it looked like compromise was on the table. Small concessions were made. Debates were permitted. Stability seemed close. But the grip on control was already slipping. Then, the movement pushed too hard. Demands escalated. Authority was openly challenged. Rumors started flying that the family's hold on the city was about to be dismantled. For a dynasty forged in the fires of betrayal and exile, this crossed a line. They knew that power, once divided, requires force to take back. The powder keg blew during what was supposed to be a moment of unity, a ceremonial gathering meant to heal the divide turned violent. Shots were fired, leaders went down. By the next morning, the reformists were gone, exiled, imprisoned, or silenced. Order was restored, but the price was heavy. The decision was pure calculation, zero emotion. The family understood that instability kills a city faster than cruelty ever could. Survival demanded clarity. Authority was centralized. Dissent was locked down. Governance became tighter, faster, and unforgiving. From then on, hesitation was viewed as a weakness. For this wealthy family, the lesson was absolute. You either hold total power or you lose it. Stability, not popularity, was the currency keeping the city alive. The streets quieted down. Trade picked back up. The city endured. The dynasty had survived another test, but a much bigger challenge was just over the horizon. The oil that never came. While Dubai fought to get back on its feet, the world around it was shifting at breakneck speed. Across the Gulf, oil discoveries were rewriting fortunes overnight. Neighboring states leaped from poverty to unimaginable wealth in a single generation. New highways, new cities, and a new elite rose up, all fueled by black gold. For Dubai's rulers, the contrast was painful. For a disciplined family, it was a warning shot. They searched relentlessly. Survey teams came in, test wells were drilled, hope would spike, then crash over and over. Every failure hammered home the same reality. Dubai didn't have the massive reserves transforming its neighbors. Years went by, and the gap widened. While others planned with certainty, this family faced the most dangerous position of all, getting left in the dust. The pressure was crushing. Merchants whispered their doubts. Rivals predicted a total decline. Some believed Dubai would fade into irrelevance once oil reshaped the region. But the Maktoum leadership refused to chase ghosts. Instead of waiting for a windfall that might never happen, they faced a harder truth. Survival would come down to choices, not geology. This realization changed the game. Instead of copying the oil states, the family pivoted from extraction to movement. Trade routes, ports, logistics, infrastructure designed to bridge continents rather than drill into the ground. If oil ever showed up, it would be a bonus, never a crutch. For this family, dependence was the real enemy. Operating without oil money forced a strict discipline. Every project had to justify its existence. Every gamble had to pay off in the long run. Debt was dangerous. Failure was unforgiving. Yet, standing still was worse. Dubai had to grow by design, not by luck. The lack of oil didn't weaken the dynasty. It sharpened their instincts. When the next gamble arrived, it would be the boldest one yet, and the city's entire future would hang in the balance. The most dangerous gamble. By this point, hesitation wasn't an option. Without oil and with trade slowing down, Dubai faced a silent killer: irrelevance. Ships were getting bigger, but the creek was choked with silt. Merchants warned that if vessels couldn't dock directly, they'd move to deeper ports for good. For the ruling family, this wasn't a debate. It was a countdown. The solution was drastic: deepen and widen the creek so modern ships could reach the heart of the city. The problem was the price tag. There was no oil revenue to fund it, and no safety net if it flopped. Borrowing the cash put the whole city on the line. If this gamble collapsed, the debt would wipe out what little stability was left. For a disciplined family, this was the kind of decision that defines a dynasty. They went ahead anyway. Engineers moved in. Dredgers clawed at the riverbed. Day after day, thousands of tons of mud were hauled out of the channel. Critics called it reckless. Rivals predicted a disaster. But the family knew the math. Without access, trade dies. Without trade, the city vanishes. When the work was done, the impact was instant. Bigger ships returned. Cargo volumes skyrocketed. Merchants who had left started coming back. Warehouses filled up. Credit started flowing again. The creek went from a bottleneck to a weapon. What looked like a desperate risk turned out to be a precise strategy. This family didn't just save the city, they reset its entire trajectory. The dredged creek became a permanent commercial artery, locking Dubai back into global trade exactly when everyone else thought they were finished. The gamble paid off not because it was bold, but because it was necessary. Dubai survived because its rulers understood one truth better than anyone else: risk doesn't kill cities. Standing still does. The city was alive again. But the next phase would be even more dangerous: debt, megaprojects, and the edge of collapse. Success changed the scale of their ambition. Once trade was locked in, the vision expanded beyond mere survival. Airports, ports, financial districts, and megaprojects rose at a speed few cities had ever attempted. The strategy was simple but risky: borrow big, build fast, and let the growth pay for the next leap. For the ruling family, speed became a weapon. Money poured in. Investors chased the momentum. The skyline transformed overnight into a global billboard of confidence. Luxury became a signal, not just a goal. Every tower, island, and free zone was engineered to attract capital, talent, and eyes. The city marketed itself as unstoppable, and for a while, the world bought it. But leverage cuts both ways. The expansion was running on debt stacked on top of debt. When global credit froze, the system seized up. Projects stalled out. Property prices crashed. Confidence dried up faster than the money. Construction sites went silent. Workers packed up. High-end assets turned into dead weight overnight. The crisis wasn't just financial, it was existential. One failure could wipe out decades of progress. For the ruling family, this was where strategy met consequences. They swallowed their pride. Survival took priority. Negotiations started behind closed doors. Support was secured. Debts were restructured. The city was stabilized before the panic could become permanent. The lesson was brutal but clear. Growth without restraint invites collapse. Ambition without a buffer invites disaster. From that moment on, discipline returned to the core of decision-making. Risk was recalculated. Expansion slowed down. Foundations were reinforced. This family didn't escape the edge by luck. They escaped it by knowing when to retreat, recalibrate, and protect the system they had built. Dubai survived not because it never failed, but because failure didn't define it. The city stood tall again. Wiser, leaner, and still dangerous. The long game of the Maktoum dynasty. After surviving the crash, Dubai didn't slow down. It recalibrated. The Maktoum dynasty understood what most leaders learned too late. Money disappears, but systems don't. That mindset is what separates a temporary boomtown from a family that controls outcomes across generations. Oil was never the end game. It was a tool, then a footnote. The real engine was diversification. Trade, logistics, aviation, tourism, finance, and real estate were woven into a single platform. Each sector backed up the others. No single shock could bring the system down again. This wasn't a recovery, it was a redesign. What defines the Maktoums is patience. They never chased dominance through noise or force. They built it through incentives, infrastructure, and predictability. Free zones lowered the friction. Ports increased the flow. Rules stayed stable while the rest of the world shifted. This family didn't try to own everything, they positioned themselves at the center of everything. Across generations, the strategy remained the same. Think in decades, not years. Every crisis became data, every setback became leverage. Exile, collapse, debt, and global shocks didn't break their control, they refined it. Dubai didn't just grow, it compounded. The lesson here isn't about skyscrapers or luxury, it's about structure. Build foundations before image, systems before scale. Never depend on a single advantage. That is how a wealthy family turns uncertainty into influence and geography into power. Dubai will keep changing. Markets will rise and fall, but the dynasty behind it understands the long game, and that is why it endures. If this story gave you some insight, hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it. Drop a 1 in the comments if you believe strategy beats resources. Type 2 if you think luck matters more. This chapter ends here. The long game does not.